Universidade de Massachusetts, novembro de 1998. Editores, fãs de quadrinhos, estudantes e professores universitários se reúnem para as comemorações pelos 20 anos da criação da novela gráfica.
At long last, the top of the hill where people who are beginning to take what I'm doing seriously. This is something that's been coming a long time. As a matter of fact, I'm really overwhelmed by that introduction of Contrary to God. I think I'm going to go back and read it again.
Para compreender a trajetória profissional de Will Eisner e sua luta para que o quadrinho fosse reconhecido como uma forma de expressão artística, a profissão cartunista volta no tempo até a dura década de 30. Os Estados Unidos viviam a Grande Depressão Econômica provocada pela quebra da Bolsa de Valores em 1929. Filho de imigrantes judeus radicados em Nova York, o menino Will vendia jornais para ajudar no orçamento familiar. Nos jornais, Will descobriu os quadrinhos. Foi amor à primeira tira.
In those days, there were something like 10 newspapers in New York City. Each one of them carried comic strips. And since I was interested in drawing, and I liked to write, and I was a very avid reader, those all together showed me that this was a medium that would be of interest to me. Well, in those days there was Crazy Cat by Harriman, who was a very strong influence on me. A cigar began with Popeye, a very strong influence. There is a skill and a science, if you will, to being influenced or learning, and that is you must look at a man's work and decide what it is he is doing that you want to learn from, or how to do it. For example, I learned how to do water, how to draw water from Prince Valiant, the strip Prince Valiant. I learned how to manage dialogue from Milton Caniff and Terry and the Pirates.
O pai de Will, que era pintor de cenários no Teatro Yiddish nova-iorquino, sempre foi um grande incentivador. As idas de Will ao teatro acompanhando seu pai exerceram uma influência fundamental.
I don't hesitate to point out that Yiddish literature, Yiddish folklore remains very much inside of me, and I think in these terms. A Contract with God was written in a Yiddish story rhythm. It's almost like the sing-song of a Yiddish storytelling.
And I think that there are people who grew up in the Depression like Will, who will always be much more moved by stories about the Depression because they were there. And as much as I and my contemporaries may be moved by them, it's in the same way I'm moved by a story about the Crusades or the Revolutionary War. So I think to the degree that Will has a universal message, it gets across. There's no age limit to what he's doing. There's no gender limit. There's no race limit. I mean, Will speaks to, I think, a universal audience.
Além de talentoso ilustrador, Eisner foi, desde jovem, um ávido leitor que pretendia escrever contos à maneira de seus ídolos, Guy de Maupassant, O. Henry e Chekhov.
For me, comics was a true literary form, and it was my dream to spend my entire life in this medium. All my other colleagues who were starting with me thought of comics as a vehicle or a stepping stone toward what they felt was a higher art form, which is painting and fine arts and so forth. And the dream essentially was that I would reach a point where this medium would achieve the status of literature and that I would someday be regarded as a writer, as I like to think of myself as a writer who writes with pictures.
Now, Eisner is a masterful artist. We have no finer artist in the United States than Will Eisner, nor do we have a better storyteller. Now, if, let's say, this is hard to think about, but suppose Will Eisner couldn't draw, an incredible idea. I truly believe he would have continued his interest in narrative and storytelling, and he would have written short stories and novels, and he would be standing there besides Faulkner and Hemingway as one of our major creative forces.
Acima de tudo, Will Eisner é um artista em constante evolução, que nunca se acomodou.
Une des grandes réussites de son œuvre, c'est d'être restée vivante et d'être toujours en train de se recréer, de se réinventer. Et j'ai toujours autant de plaisir à voir son travail que j'en avais il y a 20 ans. Et ça, c'est quand même le plus beau compliment qu'on puisse faire à un auteur.
If your work today does not look as good as the work you did yesterday, you're in serious trouble.
No início dos anos 70, o sonho de Will parecia longe de se concretizar. Tendo criado um dos mais célebres personagens dos quadrinhos, o Spirit, Eisner tinha se afastado da prancheta e concentrado seus esforços na American Visuals, produzindo material educacional e de treinamento. Tudo iria mudar quando Eisner entrou em contato com uma nova geração de artistas. A força dos quadrinhos underground desperta em Will o sonho dos quadrinhos como arte.
And I was astonished. It suddenly rang a bell in my head that these men are the new generation. This is a new revolution that's going on, because they were using comics to deal with social problems. They were protesting with comics. And they were using comics as, in my opinion, a true literary form.
The fact that Will has a career that has a watershed moment where he just decided, hey, I'm going for broke. I'm going to do this all again and reinvent it one more time. That's really swell.
A big company came along and offered to buy my shares of the company. And so within about a month, I was walking around with a lot of money in my pocket and at liberty. And my wife said to me, I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. Maybe I'll buy another publishing company. She said, why do you want to do that? You're always talking about finding new ground. She said, why don't you go back? She said, you can afford to do it now. I said, okay. And so I sat down and I realized that we're at the beginning of a revolution. So I wrote Contract with God, which was aimed at an adult audience.
One can talk about the precursors of the graphic novel, and there are a few claimants who can say they were telling stories with pictures earlier, but until 1978, when Will Eisner came along with Contract with God, there's really nothing else to compare. A lot of top professionals, ranging from Frank Miller to Art Spiegelman, will readily admit that this had an impact on them, and I think clearly the comic book industry has never been the same since. Suddenly, we had a work which was thick, it had a spine, you could put it on a shelf like a real book. It was still a comic, but it was a book.
Pela primeira vez na sua já longa carreira, Will estava sem editor. Em suas mãos, uma história que desafiava as fronteiras do meio de expressão. O termo mais usado em inglês para quadrinhos, comics, era totalmente inapropriado, dada a natureza nada cômica da obra.
So I called the president of the largest publishing company in New York, whom I knew my work. And I called him and I said, look, Oscar, I have a thing here, a very unusual thing here. It is a subject matter, a very serious subject matter. And he said, what is it called? What is it? So I looked down at the thing. I couldn't say to him, it's a comic. So I said, it's a graphic novel. Oh, he said, that sounds very unusual. I've never heard of that before. Bring it up. So I did have a meeting with him. And when he looked at it, he said to me, oh, it's still a comic. You still have balloons. I finally had to publish it with a very small publisher.
Embora o livro tenha causado uma enorme repercussão no mundo dos quadrinhos, a ousada proposta de Eisner demorou a encontrar o seu público.
The reader that I was writing to was not the reader that went into the comic book store.
In fact, as I understand it, the first store in New York that Will walked into to find his book had put it in the religion section. And this was his first clue, and a clue to many of the rest of us, that this was going to cause problems with booksellers.
My Contract with God, by the way, continues to sell. It's still now, 20 years later, it's still in print.